Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Blumenthal, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for your service. I will say on my own behalf that we're very, very fortunate at this very dangerous time in our nation's history to have one of the most impressive defense and national security teams in recent history. So thank you for your service to our nation at this very perilous time. You know, I have visited Ukraine as well as more recently Poland, the Ukrainian border, with a number of my colleagues. Since 2014, I've been very vocal, indeed vehement, in support of more lethal arms delivered more quickly to Ukrainians while they've lost 14,000 of their men and women in this fight for close to a decade against the Russians. And now I must say, I continue to feel that we need to do more and do it more quickly in providing lethal arms to Ukraine, including fighter jets, air defense systems, ammunition, Javelin missiles, Stingers, and other systems that the Ukrainians can use. Now, I agree that it's going to be a long slog, Mr. Chairman. It's a protracted war going to the east, but we need to be there for the Ukrainians in the midst of this long slog. And you've said that the outcome is an open question, but what troubles me is that saying it's an open question is a prediction. The objective is to enable the Ukrainians to win. And it seems to me that often our strategy seems somewhat schizophrenic. We want the Ukrainians to defeat the Russians, but we're afraid that pushing Putin into defeat may provoke escalation. It seems to me that we need to address those fears and realistically provide the Ukrainians what they need to win. And so let me ask you whether you feel, for example, that we can do more to train the Ukrainians in anticipation of that long slog, to use more advanced weapon systems that we could provide. Number two, can we provide systems such as the A-10s that we are, in fact, diminishing in use in our own armed services? Can we provide more naval assets to be more effective in the kinds of aerial defense that will stop Putin's reign of terror? Can you give me an assurance that we will do whatever it takes to enable the Ukrainians to win while avoiding the escalation into nuclear confrontation?
Well, thank you, sir. Well, first of all, I got to tell you that providing the Ukrainians what they need is at the top of my my list of things to focus on every day. And this is a thing that the chairman and I talk about with our subordinate commanders every day. We're personally involved in engaging countries in the region and around the world, quite frankly, in trying to make sure that we not only provide what we can, but we're getting assistance from other countries. There are some 30 nations that are providing assistance in addition to us, and that's the part that you don't see on a daily basis because we don't talk about it very often. Many of these systems are systems that the Ukrainians are used to using, and they've been very effective thus far, and we'll continue that work. Can we provide them training? Our focus right now is to provide training where necessary on those systems that we are providing them, we can get that training done in short order. They're in a knife fight, and so, taking large numbers of people out for long periods of time is not helpful to them. On the A-10, I'll invite the chairman to comment on this, but again, this is a high-threat air defense environment. And the A-10, we have to do the analysis to ensure that if you did that, it could survive. And I question whether or not it would survive in the current environment.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Secretary. Shouldn't we be using now the Defense Production Act to produce more of the Javelins, the Stingers, all of the stocks that we are using and diminishing and running low on, and our allies as well? Shouldn't we be applying the Defense Production Act?
We are pushing hard to engaging industry to make sure that we move the production of these items as quickly as we can. And that's not an easy task with at least one of the items there, but we will move this, continue to move this in terms of additional production as fast and efficiently as we can.
And are you alarmed that the Russians are not returning your call, that they're not communicating with you? Shouldn't we be alarmed?
Well, disappointed for sure, but you know, again, based upon what they've done, nothing surprises me. But it doesn't mean that we'll stop reaching out to engage them. I think we have to have the ability to talk to the leadership.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Cotton, please.
Secretary Austin, why will you not say the words win and victory when it comes to Ukraine? Senator Blumenthal just gave an impassioned speech about this. It's clear that it's what both parties want. I reviewed your written testimony. You talk about deterrence 29 times. You never once used the word win or victory in reference to Ukraine, nor does the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, the Vice President, the President. Have the words win and victory been purged from the administration's vocabulary when it comes to Ukraine?
The words win has certainly the word win has certainly not been purged from our vocabulary.
Do you want Ukraine to win, or do you want this war merely to end?
I think the chairman pointed out very accurately what a desired end state would be. Ukraine maintains its sovereignty and its ability to protect its country, defend itself. It maintains its government. Russia is weakened militarily, and Russia, from a geopolitical standpoint, is a pariah, and countries will not volunteer to align itself with Russia. Some of that will happen, but we can see those kind of things beginning to happen.
Okay, I thought that, the chairman's response to Senator Gillibrand was pretty good on this point about what Ukraine winning looked like, a free and independent Ukraine with sovereignty and control over its own territory. Does that include the territory that Russia or Russian proxies controlled in the Donbas as of February 24th, the day before the invasion?
I think it's appropriate to let President Zelensky and the government of Ukraine define what that is going forward.
Are you or anyone else in the administration discouraging President Zelensky or your counterparts from launching attacks that would involve taking back any part of the Donbas or the Crimea?
No.
Are you providing them intelligence to conduct such attacks?
We are providing them intelligence to conduct operations in the Donbas. That's correct. In the
Donbas, on the territory that Russia or its proxies controlled before the invasion?
Yeah, and we
offensive operations to reclaim their own territory. Are you providing that intelligence to them?
We want to make sure that's clear to our force, and so the updated guidance that goes out today, we'll make sure that that's clear.
Updated guidance. So that means that the current guidance has said don't provide that information.
Certainly the current guidance was not clear in that regard, so we'll make sure it's clear.
I think this is part of what you've heard from both parties in this committee is that as much as we have done, we're still engaged in too many half measures. There's still too much hesitancy and tentativeness in our posture towards this war. And I just want to talk about our own posture. Admiral Richard testified to the committee that he had advised that we should go forward with a normal, routine, regularly scheduled test of our ICBMs. That test was postponed, and now it's been canceled. Why did you cancel that test, Mr. Secretary?
Well, we postponed it so that, again, we're at a very tenuous point. Wanted to make sure that we were doing prudent things and managing escalation. And we reached a point where I made the decision that We had postponed it to the degree that it was best to go ahead and cancel it. I would tell you that I am confident in our ability to maintain our programs and to stay on track and to provide a credible deterrence and to protect our allies and partners.
Well, but see, this is I'm confident in it as well. I'm confident because we do conduct these routine tests. We don't cancel them because Vladimir Putin has decided to invade one of his neighbors. And the fact that we postponed it and now we've canceled it because it's escalatory, to me just says to Vladimir Putin that we are nervous about what he's going to do, as opposed to trying to make him nervous about what Ukraine and America and NATO is going to do next. That this
If we were concerned about him being nervous,
this is a form of self-deterrence. I mean, the chairman has said this war could go on for years. If a missile test in March of 2022 is escalatory, is it going to be escalatory in 2023 and 24 and 25?
It really depends on what's going on at that point in time. Right. But as you'll look at, I know it's not lost on you, Senator, that we've rapidly deployed forces to the eastern flank. We pushed in a tremendous amount of security assistance to Ukraine, and none of those actions indicate that we're afraid of Mr. Putin.
All right. One final question for the chairman. General Milley, I constantly hear concerns about professional military education across the services, that it's not focused enough on rigorous, operationally focused education. There's too much things that are kind of beyond the core warfighter's domain, like, international studies or development economics. You put out a very strong memo on this in May of 2020. Unfortunately, I still hear that some of the schools are not implementing that fully. Could you talk to me a little bit about your concerns in that memo and what plans you have to make sure that that's driven down to the lowest level at our professional military education schools?
Yeah, thanks, Senator. Look, the U.S. military has two tasks: prepare for war and fight and win wars. That's it. And the PME is designed to do that. We issued out that guidance in 2020 to emphasize that, warfighting, operational skills, strategic thought, et cetera. And we do periodic reviews. I just got a report probably about a couple weeks ago, actually, that I said, how many contact hours do we do in the war colleges and the staff colleges? It came out to round figures just under 5,000. Did the math. My guys did the math, the analysis, and 80% of that time was spent on warfighting, operational art, and strategy. The others are spent on things like congressional engagement, public affairs, administrative tasks that you have to do to run the military. So it is focused. 80% of the time is focused on the warfighting skills necessary for command and leadership at the staff level at different organizations.
Okay,
Thank you, Senator Cotton.
I'd really like it to 100%. I bet the one thing you'd love to strike is congressional engagement.
No, it's an important
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Arundel, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, I want to commend you for reaching the decision that you did to defuel and permanently close the Red Hill storage facility on Oahu. Ensuring the health and safety of our citizens has been my #1 priority, and this decision not only protects the island's drinking water, but will ultimately benefit operations in Indo-PACOM as we look to expand our ability to operate in a distributed manner across the AOR. I also would like to particularly thank Deputy Secretary of Defense Catherine Hicks for her diligent work on this issue and her communicating with me personally. And the closure of Red Hill is going to be a multi-year, multi-phase endeavor. There is a defueling process itself, the closure of the facility, the cleanup of the site. The entire effort will require significant planning and resources for years to come. I ask you to work closely with the Hawaii Department of Health and the EPA as we go forward. And the funding in the President's budget shows DOD's commitment to the long-term closure and cleanup of Red Hill, and demonstrates, very importantly, to the people of Hawaii that the environmental remediation will not fall to the wayside. Secretary Austin, would you like to add any comment to this?
Just a couple, Senator. First of all, I want to thank you personally for your leadership and that of your colleagues in doing the work that you did to help us work our way through this. And we remain grateful for that. I would also highlight that the safety and security and the health of our troops, our families, the people in the community is absolutely important to the Department of Defense. And you are correct. We have allocated funds that will help us begin to address the critical components here going forward. The defueling process, remediation will be no doubt carry a significant expense, and I certainly hope that Congress will continue to support us as you have done to this point. So thank you.
Thank you for your continuing leadership. Secretary, it is my understanding that this year the National Defense Strategy and the Missile Defense Review were developed simultaneously for the first time to ensure alignment of decision-making across these documents. In the NDS, one of your 4 stated priorities is defending the homeland, which will make sense to ensure missile defense is in line with that priority. And though the budget justification books are not out yet, one concern I have is for the defense of Hawaii from missile threats. And to date, the department has spent significant resources on HDR Hawaii, which I have supported because we were told many times that this was required by the operational commanders. And while we wait for greater detail on the department's decision relating to the future of HDRH Hawaii, I'd like to understand the department's position on defense of Hawaii and how, if HDR Hawaii is not funded, how the department plans to upgrade radar discrimination capability for the defense of Hawaii. And the question is, Secretary Austin, what is your plan for the future defense of Hawaii from missile threats?
In terms of the defense of Hawaii right now, we are absolutely committed to defending this country. Hawaii is a key part of that defense and certainly is defended as we speak. Going forward, Senator, you'll note that we're investing $24.7 billion in missile defense and defeat. And so, we're developing the next generation interceptor, and our goal is to stay 2 steps ahead of our adversaries' emerging technologies, and Hawaii will absolutely be a key part of that.
So just to be clear then, if we are not going to be continuing to fund HDRH Hawaii, that you are developing, as you mentioned, the next-gen interceptors to make sure that Hawaii is defended against missile threats.
Absolutely,
That's
Senator.
correct? Thank you. I just want to add my voice of concern regarding Senator Wicker's line of questioning relating to amphibious ships and the fact that there will be only 3 of the 13 planned purchases of the San Antonio-class ships. So I just want to add my concern that General Berger had asked for 31 ships, and we are falling short of that. So I hope that you have said that you are continuing to work with General Berger, so I hope that we can come to a positive resolution of the need that he has for these ships. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Rounds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, let me begin by saying thank you to all of you for your service to our country. Secretary Austin, I appreciated the comments and the clarifications and so forth that you shared with Senator Cotton. I think it's very important that the American people understand that we want the Ukrainians to win and that we will support them with the appropriate background intelligence information and weapons so that they can regain the territory that has been lost to Russia, and that includes the area in the Donbass. And I think that's a very important clarifying point, so I thank you for that, sir. I'd also, Mr. Secretary, and if this is an issue which you would prefer to have Mr. McCord address, that's fine with me, sir, but the industrial base that we have today in the United States is one that we, particularly the defense industrial base, is one that sometimes comes under question with regard to our long-term capabilities, and yet it's something that has been of concern to this committee, and I think that the Joint Chiefs have expressed their concern in the past about our ability to respond and to build the weapons and to maintain the weapons systems that we have. I want to point out one that we have in the past, and that while it did not start on your watch, sir, I think it's critical that we fix it as soon as possible. And what I'd like to talk about is an example that I've talked about before. The ability of the Navy, and I'm going to use the Navy because we've used the Navy in the past. The ability of the Navy to manage scheduled maintenance for its vessels is beyond concerning. The USS Boise is a case in point, but far from being the only example. Now, the USS Boise is a Los Angeles-class nuclear attack sub. It was commissioned in November of 1992. The Boise has not been on patrol since 2015. It lost its dive certification in 2017. Now, we've had some of our folks, my MLA was on board the Boise in September of 2019 as its crew executed pre-maintenance procedures. Here we are, 7 years plus later, since it was last on patrol, and it is still awaiting its engineered overhaul. And there is no funding to allow this to happen until, at the earliest, FY24, but probably FY25. Now, this is what's concerning. Multiple captains of the Boise have spent their entire command at sea tour while it's been stuck in limbo. American taxpayers continue to pay for a nuclear attack submarine that hasn't executed its mission in 7 years. Now, myself and my colleagues have asked tough questions of Navy leaders for at least the last 5 years, and yet nobody in the Navy has been able to solve the problem. Now I'm hearing that the Boise may be decommissioned without ever receiving an overhaul. I think this is simply not acceptable to have the taxpayer-funded nuclear attack submarine with those capabilities out of service for more than 7 years, and we can't seem to get to the bottom of what the problem is. Mr. Secretary, I'm not sure if you're prepared to discuss this or if you'd like to have Mr. McCord attempt it, but I'd sure like to hear your thoughts.
Well, thanks, sir. I'd certainly invite Secretary McCord to make comments as well, but a couple of points that I would make up front is that, as you've heard me say, we continue to invest in our sub capability, especially the Columbia class, and that will continue going forward. We think it's critical. But the issue that you raise, I think, is an issue of capacity in our shipyards. And so this budget invests $1.7 billion in public shipyard capacity and the industrial base. I think it's critical, and we'll continue to do our part to make sure that we're helping the industry have what it, or helping create the capacity to take care of our capabilities here.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. And perhaps rather than spending the rest of my time on this particular one, could I ask, would you get back with us and let's find a solution to this problem?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. General Milley, I have just one question for you, and that is I know that you've been an Army officer and that you have commanded ground troops and you understand the need to have all possible systems available for their use. There was and there continues to be a question as to whether or not landmines should be a part of our systems of operations. And yet sometimes I think people get a misunderstanding of the difference between anti-vehicle landmines and those which are anti-personnel landmines, and they don't understand the differences on them. This is a needed capability for our armed forces, is to have the ability for these landmines to be able to be used in certain situations. You understand that. The Army has been developing landmine alternatives for over 12 years, yet the objective capability is not scheduled to be fielded until at least FY30 or 31. To me, the results are unacceptable to the mission and to the force. General Milley, could you, using your best professional military advice, share with this committee the need or without the need for the upgrade of landmines and its critical importance to our armed forces?
Thanks, Senator. I do think landmines are important, especially if you're in the defense, but also in any other capability in order to shape enemy operations. We need to look no further than what's happening actually in Ukraine. The landmines are being effectively used by the Ukrainian forces to shape the avenues of approach by Russian armored forces, which puts them into engagement areas and makes them vulnerable to the anti-tank, the 60,000 anti-tank weapon systems that we're providing the Ukrainians. So that's one of the reasons why you see column after column of Russian vehicles that are destroyed. So anti-tank or anti-personnel mines are very effective use in combat. There is a policy governing those for the United States for use, and the reason we're developing a newer one is so that they time out and they don't present harm after the conclusion of hostilities, and they would self-detonate or destroy. They become inert at the end of hostilities. So, but landmines are very effective use in combat.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Thank you very much. Senator Kane, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for your service and for your effective work in recent months. So as Russia moves the focus of their military operations to Donbass and the south, how would you, Secretary and Chairman, characterize north and west Ukraine now? Is it battlefield or non-battlefield?
Well, I would still categorize it as a part of the operating environment, the battlefield, the battle space. There's no telling what Mr. Putin will decide to do going forward. Certainly, we expect that he'll continue to conduct strikes throughout that landscape. So in my view, it's still a part of the battlefield.
General?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, the main effort, if you will, of the Russians is shifting to the south in the vicinity of Donbass, as reported through the news. And that really goes from Kherson all the way up through Kharkiv, with the main effort in the vicinity of Izium. But the rest of Ukraine is still a battlefield because there's air and missile strikes that still go on, and Russian Special Operations Force is still operating in some of those areas. So it is clearly still a combat zone in the rest of Ukraine as well.
As the war ratchets up in the south and east, do you agree with me that it's likely that Ukrainians in that region, in some numbers, will try to flee the region either to other parts of Ukraine or to other countries?
I think for civilians, the answer, the human instinct to survive is very powerful. So they recognize the danger they're in. I think there'll be a high likelihood that additional refugees or internally displaced persons will leave. We've already got 5 million or so refugees, another 5 million, I think, of internal displaced. So you're well over 10 million right now. And I would imagine more will leave that area.
And as a general matter, I think Ukrainians would like to stay in their own country. If we could shape it, wouldn't it be better for those fleeing the east to go elsewhere in Ukraine if they were safe, rather than to go into other nations where they are a significant burden on other countries?
Sure. I mean,
if President Zelensky were to appeal to the United States, NATO, the UN, and say, the ratcheting up of the war in the East is going to create such a pressure for people to flee, these people want to stay in Ukraine, can you, as our allies and NGOs, flood humanitarian relief into Western Ukraine, shelter, medical capacity, food, so that displaced persons in large numbers will be able to come to a place in Ukraine rather than flee across the borders, and President Zelensky were to ask for the United States' assistance in doing that? Should we seriously entertain that request?
I would say that's a policy question, but in terms of humanitarian aid, there is a lot of humanitarian aid moving into Ukraine in addition to the military aid. But the latter question, or the question itself, I think, is more appropriate as a policy question.
Mr. Secretary.
I agree with the chairman, Senator. It is a question that our leadership will have to take on and be very deliberate about. And one of the things that we would need to consider is what we need to do if we're going to put people in there to protect that area. And that's a decision that takes you to, to fighting the Russians. And so that's a pretty significant decision. But I would emphasize what the chairman has said. USAID and others are flowing a lot of humanitarian assistance across the border now. And the Europeans are pretty good at providing this kind of assistance.
Great. Let me switch topics. Some of my colleagues have raised the concern about inflation and what that means with respect to the defense budget. There's other economic trends other than inflation. Historic job growth right now, historic growth in the GDP, historic growth in wages and salaries. This morning, new unemployment claims were announced, and it is the lowest number since 1968. In January of 2021, we were seeing 965,000 new unemployment claims a week. It's 166,000 now. Many of us met with Admiral Gilday and Secretary Del Toro this morning. We asked about, hey, that's fantastic. The strong job growth is great, but it also creates workforce challenges, both within the uniform service, but also in our industrial base. How are you tackling the workforce needs of our defense system today when unemployment rate is dropping so quickly?
Well, that certainly does. One of the things that creates headwinds for us going forward in terms of recruiting not only uniformed personnel, but also getting the right kinds of talent that we need to fill our ranks here. We'll continue to devote resources to making sure that we're doing the right things in marketing and advertising and outreach. But these are challenges that we've faced before, and we're just going to have to double down and make sure that we are active in the right areas, and we're committing the right resources to make sure that we get the quality people that we need to be successful.
Thank you, Senator Kaine. Senator Ernst, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your continued service to our great country. We are appreciative. And Secretary Austin, there has been a lot of discussion about Ukraine and Russia this morning. And in your opening statement that you did say that U.S. security policy must reflect the will of the American people. And the American people right now are calling on the administration to do more and to be tougher on Russia and bring more capability to bear for Ukraine. The Washington Post just this morning in one of their polls found that 56% of Americans think we haven't been tough enough on Russia. And so whatever the hesitancy to say win for Ukraine, victory for Ukraine, I will say it. I know a number of my colleagues will say it. I feel very firmly about victory for Ukraine and maintaining its sovereign integrity as a nation, their democratic form of governance. It's all very important to so many Americans because so many Americans see themselves reflected in the Ukrainians. They are a first world country. They've come a long way over the last 30 years. So success to me is still a free and sovereign Ukraine. So I do hope that we will continue to press very hard to make sure, as you stated, things are speeding up, delivery of lethal aid, but we absolutely must ensure that we are doing everything we can for the country of Ukraine and the citizens that are there. So I am going to turn, because we've focused a lot on Ukraine and Russia. General Milley, I'd like to jump to Central Command, if we can. I am concerned about the budgetary cuts and some of the flat lines that we are seeing across our CENTCOM operations budget. And many of the extremist organizations that are backed by the Iranian regime are striking across the region. And there's 4 terrorist organizations that are now operating in Afghanistan, and yet we don't have a U.S. footprint there to make sure that they aren't pushing threats against our homeland. So how have your Gulf state military counterparts, particularly Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the Abraham Accords member countries, reacted to our reduced military budget? Have you had any input from them?
Not about the budget per se, but there is concern because we are, the Department of Defense, we are doing a global posture review, as you know, and we're making adjustments to the footprint, and the Ukraine situation is a new development since we began that review quite some time ago. And CENTCOM is part of that review as well. So there is concern in the CENTCOM area of operations about what the result will be in terms of the footprint in CENTCOM, and we are continuing to work with our allies and partners to make sure it's appropriate to the level of threat. We clearly recognize the terrorist threat, both the residual threat in Afghanistan, but also throughout the region. Mm-hmm. And we think that we do have over-the-horizon capabilities, which we can discuss in classified session, but we do think we're effective in being able to find, fix, and when necessary, strike any potential threat to the homeland.
And it has been reported that the Emiratis won't accept the president's phone calls. Are you able to visit with your counterparts in the UAE?
I have not had any issue contacting counterparts in the Middle East. Or
Okay.
in Singapore anywhere.
And thank you for continuing the conversation with them. It is important that we maintain relationships through the Middle East, so I do appreciate that. With the administration continuing the negotiation of the Iranian nuclear deal, and then pair that with the reduced footprint that we have in the Middle East, is that driving some of the Gulf states' neutrality when it comes to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict? Your opinion?
I actually don't know. I'd have to ask them point blank. I haven't asked those questions point blank to them. I think they probably, I don't know, I'd be speculating, so I'd have to kind of get back to you on that.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. And then just very briefly as well, we haven't talked about this today, but it is something that is on my mind, and that is recruiting for our military. And we have found that Americans between the age of 17 to 24, only 29% of them would even be eligible to enlist. Just very briefly, thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're about right. 29% are eligible to meet the standards, medical, educational, discipline, legal, all that. And even less than that have a propensity. It's less than 5% that have a propensity to serve. And we know that part of that is because of COVID. We know the propensity to serve goes up once you make contact. So personal contact with individuals out there in the recruiting regions, that's the key to propensity to serve. So it is a tough recruiting environment right now, and as you know, I think the Army's a little bit behind. Navy, Marines, and Air Force are all meeting their marks. We're only 4 months into the year, and that'll get adjusted as high schools graduate in the summer. And I think at the end of the year, the Army's projected to come in a point or two below 100%. The other services are going to be at 100%.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the new budget, the Pentagon is asking for a lot of money, $773 billion. But some lawmakers say this is too low. And last week they proposed adding as much as 90 to 100 billion more. The claim is that the extra money is needed because of inflation. Now, there's no question that inflation is raising costs across the country. But we've also seen big companies taking advantage of inflation to jack up prices and to pad their profit margins. That is a particular problem in industries with lots of consolidation. The defense industry, which had 51 major companies competing for defense contracts 30 years ago, today has 5. That is concentration. Price gouging by defense contractors has been a big problem for a long time. Inspector General reports have found that defense contractors charge DOD $71 for a pin that should have cost less than a nickel, and $80 for a drain pipe segment that should have cost $1.41. And CEOs are already bragging to their investors that profits will be even higher this year. That kind of profiteering wastes taxpayer dollars and it hurts military readiness. Secretary Austin, let me ask you, under our budget, obviously, we have to account for cases where suppliers are increasing prices to cover higher costs elsewhere in the supply chain. We understand that. But these companies are doing very well for themselves. Should taxpayers be expected to subsidize higher profits for contractors that are using inflation as a cover to raise their prices above and beyond what is justified by an increase in expenses?
Short answer, Senator, is no. And you have my commitment and the commitment of my entire team that we're going to do everything within our power to make sure that we're managing contracts and monitoring behavior so that we enable the people of the United States of America to get best value for its investments.
Good. I very much appreciate that, Secretary Austin. You know, one of the things that defense contractors love to do when they're flush with extra cash, courtesy of the taxpayers, is to use it to goose their stock prices. The Pentagon's top contractors spent $15.5 billion on net buybacks last year, sending their stock prices zooming. That is the most of any year on record ever. But it's not just members of Congress who are using inflation as an excuse to ask for more money from the Pentagon. I was actually troubled to hear some Pentagon officials doing the same earlier this week. So, Secretary Austin, let me ask you directly. Are you comfortable with the figure in the President's proposed budget?
I am comfortable, and here's why, Senator. You may have heard me say earlier that we went through great pains. We developed the National Defense Strategy, and we knew that our budget would have to match that strategy. And so we went through great pains to make sure that that was the case. This is a robust budget, and I think it allows us to get the capabilities that we need to support our operational concepts.
Okay, and you are good on this number without adding another $90 or $100 billion to it?
We certainly want to have the buying power to get the things that we need, but yeah, this budget gives us what we need to get the operational capabilities.
Okay, look, I think that $773 billion for the Pentagon is already way too high. But the notion that we need to increase the total by another $100 billion or $400 billion every year just invites defense contractors to pick taxpayers' pockets. The American people are willing to pay to defend this country, but they're not going to sit still for being gouged by hugely profitable defense companies. And I appreciate your help on this, Secretary Austin. I am almost out of time, but Mr. McCord, I want to remind you that you owe this committee a backlog of several years of reports on the European Deterrence Initiative. Do I have your word we're going to get that done soon?
Yes, Senator, we'll get those reports.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you for your hard work. I know you've been burning the midnight oil. This committee certainly appreciates it. I want to agree with Senator Fisher on the NDS and getting that out. I actually read the classified version. I think there's not much in it that's classified, actually. I think you could get that out publicly pretty soon, you know, maybe remove a certain element to it, but I think that would be important. I was struck by pretty much everybody here, the chairman, all of you gentlemen, talking about how dire the global security challenges are, great power conflict increasing, more likely. General Milley, you said the greatest threat to global peace and security in your lifetime right now. So clearly, national security threats have increased since the last time you were here a year ago. Isn't that correct, Mr. Secretary, General Milley?
Well, certainly, we've been focused on our pacing challenge of China.
Yeah.
Russia is an acute threat.
Right.
And right.
But I mean, I don't want to be rude, but just since you testified last year, you compare your testimony today, both of yours, with last year's, the security threat has been significantly heightened. That's what you've just both said, correct?
Tensions are certainly heightened. That's right.
General Milley? You already said it, so.
That's correct. That's my.
So here's the thing on that. I am actually stunned that the president put forward another budget that actually calls for real defense cuts. 4% increase with 8% inflation is a 4% real inflation adjusted budget. I think it's irresponsible. I think it's dangerous when you look at shrinking the Navy, shrinking the Air Force. There's no doubt in my mind that that gives our enemies comfort, and I think that this budget doesn't align with your statements about the severity of the national security challenges we face right now. And what's likely to happen, and it's sad, is that once again we're going to have to push the president to increase the budget in a bipartisan way, the way we did it last year. It's sad. The commander-in-chief can't reject some of his far-left members and say we need a robust budget. We put forward a budget that cuts defense spending. So I'm going to have problems with that. General Milley, I want to compliment you on your speech. I think it was in 2016. You gave a really prophetic, in my view, speech on Putin and the threat he brings forward. And you were actually criticized for that speech, I remember. But I think if you reread the speech, you were right on with what was happening. But you're seeing here, I think there's a source of bipartisan frustration to what's happening. I know you've been working it hard on Ukraine, but I think when the intel committees were briefing us prior to the invasion, they got it right, and so did all of you, what was going to happen. Then there was this notion that, and we were all briefed on it, that they were going to lose Ukrainians within 7 to 10 days. That was the uniform briefing. They're going to get crushed. Okay, they got that wrong. A lot of people got that wrong. I think the shift that we need to do now is to Senator Blumenthal, Senator Cotton, Senator Ernst, to strategically think about victory. And again, General Milley, I know you're working this hard, but when you talk about key objectives, number one, don't engage Russia with a conflict, keep NATO cohesion, support the Ukrainian people as the key objectives. Doesn't it make sense to have as our number one objective imposing a strategic defeat on Putin that we have the opportunity to do right now, in line with what you said? And I think that's the source of frustration for a lot of senators. We're not hearing that language.
Yeah, I think, well, I've heard that language many times, actually.
Well, I mean, you just listed 3 objectives.
Those
that
were the,
to be honest, they were all defensive sounding. Here's what we won't do. Here's what we won't do.
Right.
Here's what we will do. But what about, we're at a big moment. This is bigger than Ukraine. What about getting,
if I may.
Yes, sir, go
At
ahead.
the national level, the president has said to us writ large, the national security team, to impose severe costs and do not let Putin win. To ensure that Ukraine...
I would respectfully recommend you put that as your number one objective. You didn't even mention that in your 3 objectives.
Well, right, but those severe costs are being done by other elements, not the U.S. uniformed military. That's why the U.S. uniformed military has a different task here, which is to assure and deter our NATO allies to prevent war expanding and escalating, to ensure that Ukraine gets the means that are necessary in order to defend itself so it can remain free and sovereign, and then also to continue to maintain the cohesion of NATO. Those are the uniform military tasks. What I'm talking about are broader than just the uniform.
I have one question, Mr. Chairman, that'll be quick, just one final one. There are press reports that the JCPOA consideration, one of the big red line debates right now, is for us to agree, us, the United States, to delist the IRGC as an organization that sponsors terrorism. The Iranians want it. You gentlemen, unfortunately, have led troops, some of our finest, over 2,000 wounded and killed by the Quds Force, IRGC, with the weapons they supplied to Iraqi Shia militias. I'm sure hundreds under your command were killed or wounded. The IRGC has recently been responsible for missile attacks in coordination with the Houthis against UAE civilians, our long-standing ally in the region, UAE. Is there any universe in which the two of you could say you support the delisting of this terrorist organization with blood of American soldiers on its hands recently and delist them as a state sponsor of terrorism because Iran wants it? We should tell Iran to go pound sand. There's no way in hell that they shouldn't be delisted. What do you two, in your personal opinion, given how much experience you have with Iran in the Middle East, believe on that question?
Senator, respectfully, I won't comment on negotiations that are ongoing and speculate on what my advice to the president is going to be. So I'll...
in your personal opinion, we've asked you before that you can give us that, even though it might conflict with the administration's view. That's what you committed to do with this committee. So I'd ask you again, both of you, in your personal opinion.
And my answer remains unchanged, Senator. Thank you.
General Milley, you've been asked in your personal opinion.
Yeah, Senator, just for clarity, political appointees are different than me. I have to sign a document that requires me to give you.
You're right, and I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, I didn't mean you. I meant General Milley.
So in my personal opinion, I believe the IRGC Quds Force to be a terrorist organization, and I do not support them being delisted from the foreign terrorist organization.
Thank you for your honesty.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Thank you very much. Senator King, please.
Thank you. A series of fairly detailed questions. Mr. McCord, you haven't had much fun this morning, so I want to try to get you into this discussion. The Ukrainian aid that we've supplied thus far and we're planning to supply and will undoubtedly supply more in the future, where does that fit into the defense budget? We don't have OCO anymore. Is this coming out of the current defense budget? Are they extra budgetary appropriations?
Senator, the aid that the Secretary's been talking about this morning, the javelins, the stingers, the body armor, all those things have come out of the funding that was provided in the supplemental attached to the omnibus funding bill that was enacted 3 or 4 weeks ago.
And there's going to be replenishment as well. We're going to have to replenish stocks that we're supplying and also replenishment to some of our NATO allies. Will that come out of the future defense budget? This isn't an argumentative question. I'm legitimately curious.
No, you're correct, Senator. The funding to replenish, part of that supplemental, $3.5 billion of that supplemental was funds to replenish the drawdown materials provided to Ukraine. The first tranche of that was notified to the committee, I believe, last Friday, that $1.5 billion of those funds will start flowing. But it is not part of a normal defense budget build to exercise drawdown authority at this level. So were it to continue, that might be something we need to look at going forward.
Two other questions. I think you testified, you wrestled with inflation as you were preparing the budget. I think you said that the general CPI rate of inflation doesn't necessarily apply to the things that you buy. Is that correct? So it's not accurate to say if we have 7% inflation, the military budget doesn't have 7% increase, then it's a cut. Please explain the inflation as it applies to the military budget.
That's correct. About 60 to 65% of our budget is buying goods and services from our industrial base, and about 25-30% then goes to military pay, and then we have a couple other factors like fuel. We have different inflation rates that apply to each of them, but by and large, a GDP deflator is the most accurate description of what we buy. That went up 4% last year, not 7%. That's the point I was making.
Quick other question for you. How are we doing on the audit? That's been something that's been going on as long as I've been on this committee. Are we making progress to getting toward a clean audit?
Senator, we're making progress, but the progress is not where it needs to be. The Secretary's been clear with me on that the progress we made last year was not where it needed to be, and there was a couple reasons for that, from the gaps in a transition year to COVID. We've been making some progress that is a little bit below the radar screen, that is not yet translated to the pass-fail grades that are the heart of an audit. We do need to redouble our efforts in the Secretary.
Well, I would appreciate it. The prior administration made some progress on that, and I hope that the momentum won't be lost. That this is a responsibility we have to the American people. Secretary Austin, there are several wars going on in the world right now. One is in Ukraine, but one of them is also within the United States, where about, I think, 100,000 people died of overdose deaths last year. That's an attack on our country. My concern is when we had Southcom in here, they have 1% of the ISR resources worldwide, and they don't have adequate resources to interdict those shipments by sea that we know about through our limited ISR. I would hope that you would pay some attention to that, to add your attention to that, and also to think about setting this up in some way that there's somebody in charge. My worry is you've got DEA, you've got the Coast Guard, you've got partners, you've got the CIA, and you've got the Defense Department. Nobody's in charge, and the result is 2 people a day in my state are dying. And I understand we got to work on the demand side, but it's very frustrating when I have testimony year after year that we're only interdicting 25% of the shipments that we know about. That's inexcusable. Mr. Secretary, I hope you'll recommit to this war.
2 things, Senator. We'll certainly make sure that Southcom commander has what she needs to be effective in these efforts. And I've discussed this with her before, but clearly, the limiting factor is ISR. and we'll work with her to make sure that where possible, we get her more capability.
Well, let's put it in the budget and buy more. I mean, ISR is a function of how many devices you have, and it seems to me that's an engineering problem, and we should be able to solve that. I'm out of time, but Mr. Secretary, I want to commend you on the significant growth in the R&D budget. I think that's an enormously important area, and frankly, it's an area where we have fallen behind. Hypersonics and directed energy are two areas that are strategic game changers that, frankly, I think our country is behind. And so the additional resources into R&D is absolutely critical. Wars are often turned on the utilization of new technology. The English at the Battle of Agincourt, with 1/3 of the French army, won that battle because of the radical utilization of the longbow. That changed warfare in 1450, and it's technology that's going to win the next war. And so, I want to commend you for the commitment to R&D and stand fast on that. I don't think there's a more important expenditure in the budget. Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you both for being here and for your service. Mr. Secretary, last month, your deputy said that the department, as directed by President Biden, aims to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Then she mentioned the danger posed by China, illegal Russian aggression in Europe, persistent threats from Iran, North Korea, and other state actors. You both and others that work with and under you consistently and appropriately reference the importance of modernization, lethality, readiness, obviously. My question is, do you think China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea are going to be slowed in their military development by climate change concerns?
I don't believe so, and I don't believe we will either, Senator.
Do you know if they have plans to reach net zero, any of them?
Senator, I've asked you for $773 billion to support the capabilities that we think we need, and I certainly appreciate what you've done for us in the past. But I think there's also things that we can and should be doing to address the climate issue as well. It affects our installations. It causes problems that cause mass migration and other things in the areas that we operate in. Our forces are committed to fighting wildfires and helping in the aftermath of severe storms on an increasing basis. So I don't think this is a thing that we can discount, and I think that the Defense Department has to do its part.
I appreciate that, and frankly, I hope that we can give you a lot more than you've asked for, actually, to do those things, Mr. Secretary. But as you're talking, I'm imagining the calculation that would measure the negative impact of say, our failure to deter Russian invasion of Ukraine. In other words, I appreciate that you have this concern, but I also hope we can keep the main thing, because just like more energy development in the United States and providing that energy to our allies actually brings down greenhouse gas emissions, I think deterring the same polluters that have benefited from a lower standard than ours would also do the same. And so we want to make sure you have the resources to do exactly what you need to do to accomplish all those good goals. General Milley, maybe I could just ask you, if, I know you don't mention it much. In fact, you didn't at all. The Secretary mentioned climate change 5 times in his written opening comments. It's referenced in the National Defense Strategy, sort of highlighted. We'll see if it's in the National Military Strategy when you provide that. But do you think climate change is a military objective the department should be focused on tackling?
It's a departmental objective. For the military, though, for the uniformed military, it is a condition under which we will operate, and it's something that we have to take into consideration in the conduct of our operations, for sure, because, if you look at Lake Chad, it's just one example. You look at a picture of 1950 and look at Lake Chad and look at it today, Well, the reason that there's a lot of instability in that particular region is because there's no water and there's a lot of resource struggles going on. So climate change has an impact on military operations, to be sure, and it's going to be a predictor for where likely instability will occur in the future. So it's a condition under which we operate as opposed to something that we can fix.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I want to talk a little bit about the fear of escalation. That's, that we hear that a lot. It seems that, that many times the fear of escalating the situation in Russia depends on us and a lot less on Vladimir Putin. I just think we've made too many, my personal view is we've made too many decisions based on how we think Vladimir Putin would respond to the situation. Things like limiting the kind of help we would provide Ukraine, how quickly we'd provide that help, postponing and then canceling a Minuteman test that was scheduled, Minuteman III test, and not facilitating the transfer of MiGs. Just a few of the examples. Do you have any evidence that Vladimir Putin is ever worried that his massacre of women and children, civilians, would be escalatory?
I don't know what's in the mind of Vladimir Putin, and a lot of other people don't either, Senator. You use the word fear and Putin in the same sentence, and I just want to point out that it's my job, one of my key responsibilities, to manage escalation and make sure that that we don't find ourselves in a nuclear contest if that's avoidable. And again, there's nothing about Mr. Putin that we fear. And you see the evidence of the kinds of things that we've done in rapidly deploying combat power to Europe and the eastern flank, and what we have done and continue to do to provide assistance to Ukraine. And, not a military issue, but the sanctions that we've imposed on Mr. Putin are going to have a significant impact on his economy for years to come.
Thank you, Senator Kramer. Senator Rosen, please.